So I'm Julia Scott. I work with XRSI, which is a privacy and safety organization for emerging technologies. And I'm going to be speaking mostly about that aspect of my work here today, but my primary role is at Santa Clara University as a director of the Brain and Memory Care Lab within a healthcare innovation program. So using a lot of these tools to develop interventions and assess the efficacy of these interventions. So we can do more thorough introductions of our speakers here today. We're all kind of representing a different area of the ecosystem of healthcare. And in the context today, it's how do we use these technologies in the healthcare ecosystem. So I can start with Brennan.
Okay, hi everyone, good morning. Welcome to Southern California. To those of you that aren't from around here, I just drove down from Los Angeles to be with you today. So I am Brennan Spiegel. I am a physician and also professor of medicine and public health and biomedical sciences, and run health services research at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, where I also run our virtual medicine program, and we call it VMed for short. And we're focused entirely on understanding the role of XR for managing chronic conditions like chronic pain, anxiety, depression, and many others. So we have an NIH-funded lab focused on understanding the mechanisms of action and the clinical benefits of using XR across a variety of different conditions. So I look forward to speaking more about it.
Mark?
Hi everyone, I'm Mark Zhang. I'm also a physician, palliative care and clinical informatics. I wear a couple of hats, but I'm here because I created and am the president of the American Medical Extended Reality Association, which is the medical society dedicated to XR. And we've been around for about 3 years. We have a little under 300 members. We started the Journal of Medical Extended Reality about a year ago. Brennan was the inaugural editor-in-chief. And our goal is really to build out the community, advance the science, and really help with education. So we're trying to push on all those three fronts and working with our ecosystem partners like IVRHA and VMed with Brennan's group and just trying to make it work. So nice to meet you all.
And Bob?
I'm Bob Fine. I'm not a physician. I am an engineer. My background's in engineering, IT, and environmental science and policy. Started IVRHA back in 2017-18. We held our first conference back in 2017 and with Walter Greenleaf doing a remote keynote, and that was at GW in DC. We're about to have our 10th conference next year, early next year, and we have 130 members between startups, hospitals, and universities, with about 40% outside of the U.S. And I do want to say that it's over the last 2 years working with Mark and Brennan and building a better working relationship and helping bring more awareness to the journal and everything. It's been a great relationship, and I think we all have the same goals in place.
And that brings us to why do we have a separate session on developing solutions for healthcare? When we are bringing it into this ecosystem, it's playing by another set of rules. You might have the same boxes of, you innovate your prototype, you get something that is fully functional, and then that next step of getting it to your users looks a bit different. And sometimes it may feel like jumping through a lot of hoops, but as the pitch demonstrated like yesterday, it's really about patient safety, that you're going through this rigorous process in order to ensure what reaches patients is safe, efficacious, and provides a cost-to-benefit ratio that works within the entire system. And so that's really why we brought together these 4 categories of XRSI, and I lead the medical council that's focused on the safety component, especially when it comes to the data that is gathered through these technologies. Brennan, as founder of the journal, talking more about the research and the clinical research that needs to occur in order to gather the evidence. Mark, as the AMXRA, as the provider's role in the adoption and approval of these sorts of tools, and then with Bob representing the role that industry has in the solution development and the cooperation between the providers of the solutions and the users of the solution. My first question to you guys is, why do we even need XR in healthcare? What gap is it filling? What problem is it solving that we can't do with our traditional medicine approaches?
Well, I guess I'll start. I'm in the pole position, but we'll start mixing it up as we go. Well, I think there's been a strong interest among our patients and increasingly amongst clinicians that we identify non-pharmacological approaches to managing chronic disease. That's not to the exclusion of traditional medicine, but it's to the extension of traditional medicine. And we know, for example, that placebo works really well. What is placebo? It's a simulation. It's a simulation of a medicine, and it's tremendously effective. It's one of the most effective medicines that we have is a placebo. And it's a focus of great interest to the scientific community about what is it about a pill that doesn't have any active ingredients that can be so amazingly effective to humans. In fact, next week in Poland, I'm giving a keynote in the World Placebo Conference about VR, because they're trying to understand what is it about extended reality and living in a simulacrum of some other world that can affect the mind and body in a way that can improve human health and well-being. And what does that say about our consciousness, about the way our mind and body are connected? What can we learn from XR that could advance our understanding of the relationship between mind and body, and even philosophical questions of consciousness? And then you start talking about where are we in the world of AI, and all sorts of questions tumble out of that. And so that's why we need XR in medicine, because it's teaching us about the nature of medicine. And if we are living in a simulation, then what we're doing is creating a simulation within it. And maybe medicine then is, in its purest form, is fixing the bugs in the code so that we can live more empowered, enlightened lives. So that's my thought.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. There's like a almost inherent kind of, for me, a bias when I hear placebo as something negative.
Right.
But in many ways, maybe that's just a frame, and really it's just that we don't know why. And that this power of the mind and body is so strong. And what's so exciting about XR, and of course this is a panel of true believers in a conference for ostensibly true believers, so it's
That's why I can throw something out about living in a simulation, not get booed at.
That's right.
I tried that at the medical conference.
Okay, maybe we are, I don't know.
It's a friendly crowd. But I think that XR is clearly a key to addressing, and there's decades and decades of research on different areas where XR can help in medicine and healthcare. I think that's what's so exciting. I'm probably the most junior, I definitely am the most junior of the folks in this panel with experience in XR. I came into this space about five years ago. And what I saw was clearly a technology that was, in my mind, gonna hit. And I lived through when I was doing medicine and when I was a medical student and early stage resident, the rise of the smartphone and the iPhone, and seeing how what ultimately happened with medicine was that it's not like we wanted that. Society dictated that this is the new way we are going to compute, and then we had to respond. And to me, this is what's going to happen with XR. It's going to be a tool that I think society is just going to adopt. And we're going to need to respond to that. And I think it's madness to think that medicine is not going to evolve, right? What is 21st century medicine if not heavily influenced by technology, societal change, and other factors, right? What are the future fields of medicine? I would humbly say that XR is going to be one of them, and that's why we built AIM-XRA.
Yeah, I guess when I think about it and why it's such an interesting space is there's, at least from my point of view, there's kind of three separate areas within healthcare where the application of XR might fall into. It's the patient focus, whether it's at home, pre or post operative, or within the hospital. Education side for nurses, med students, ongoing professional education, and then the in hospital operations, whether it's in surgical support or even just easing the process workflow for the staff. A lot of opportunities there. what was Julia, when you started and you kind of were talking about the patient safety aspects and XRSI's focus on ensuring that people have a good experience with XR and it's not negative, but it also made me think about, there's such a value add for XR in the training of preventing medical errors, also impacting patient safety. So there's a whole number of different ways to look at and where XR can have significant impact, and seeing the data and seeing the studies that demonstrate the differences of a before and after when using XR, it's just so powerful and convincing, and I think that's why we're all up here.
Right. And to just kind of add to that of what XR does, these range of tools do that other methods can't, is in a unique way observe and interact with the user. And so gathering data about how you are moving, how are you thinking, where are you looking, like literally what are you thinking, and you add in all these other components, and you're getting data that from the patient that you would not be able to get otherwise. Similar on the medical error, when you're using this in training and the surgeon in training is getting feedback on the efficiency of their procedure, and getting that simulation done before over and over again prior to going in and working directly on a patient. So with that comes, if we're getting inferences, we're getting meaning out of this that we wouldn't otherwise have, we now have a whole load of sensitive data that needs to be safeguarded. Because when we are doing this, we are essentially changing mind and body. And in what other use of these technologies is the intent to actually change your sense of self? And it might be a fun experience, it might be an educational experience, but these are the things that are affecting our autonomy. So the progress we need to make is in the process of how we go through this. How do we evaluate XR for these applications? Because it does have new dimensions that don't fall into all the traditional digital health category, traditional pharma category, and the collaboration between the research and the clinical trials, I think, is one of those key areas. And Brennan, I was hoping you could describe what a clinical trial for XR really looks like.
Yeah, so if we're going to approach this with the same rigor as any other area of medicine, then we need to use the same standards that we would apply to a pill. As I mentioned earlier, this is, in essence, a digital pill, a digiceutical. So we need to think about how to be rigorous. And several years ago, we developed a conceptual model around this and published it. And just like FDA has phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 trials, we developed this idea of VR1, VR2, and VR3 trials. Now we might have called it XR. And the whole idea behind this sequence is to progressively step through a series of rigorous methodologies, ultimately culminating in a high-quality randomized controlled trial with a clinically relevant endpoint that patients and their providers care about, in some kind of blinded fashion with a sham control. And I won't go through all the details of that model, but you can look it up. It's called the VR Core model. Burkhead is the first author. And basically, it all depends, to answer your question, what phase are we in? So in short, a VR1 study is all about human-centered design. This is the developers in the room working very closely with end users early and often and making zero assumptions about what they want and understanding exactly what they want by talking to them first and then iteratively improving the concept of the intervention and only then starting to build it. So that's something our lab does. We spend a lot of time working with our patients, finding out what they want, doing mixed methods and qualitative research. And then when we build a prototype, we will bring patients in, have them use it, and they give us feedback, and then we immediately will start working on it and bring in another patient later in the afternoon, already having changed the software. So it's a very intercalated process between development and end user feedback, rapid cycle feedback, and that's VR1. And I won't go through all the details, but VR2 is an uncontrolled case series looking at safety, initial evidence of efficacy, and then VR3 is a proper randomized control trial.
and to add to that, like, how do you create that sham control, which is a whole nother conversation. Susan Persky over in row 3 can give a lecture on that, and she has.
Literally has, yeah.
And the book that will come. So there's a lot of nuance to that. But what I'm doing here is making sure I point you to the resources on the developer side, where there is an idea of what you want to create and a problem to solve, and there's a lot of how questions and why questions, and in this room, a lot of that can get answered. There's a lot of expertise sitting in this room beyond who we have here, and we're here to help. So there's a clinical trial process. You might engage patients. What about the providers? What do the providers need clinicians need out of XR solutions?
Yeah, and maybe just even to build off of just like thinking about research in VR or XR, any type of use case you're thinking in the medical side, whether it's patient-facing or clinician-facing, there's probably maybe an updated version where there's a VR XR 0, which is really like, is the XR technology the right tool for the intervention you want, right? And really thinking about that, right? And I've had like multiple conversations with many people, many in this room during this conference about this. You know, like we have this potential of square pegging a round hole, or whatever the saying is. So I think
it's round pegging a square hole.
Oh,
I'm just kidding. It's the same thing.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, in this simulation, I think it's a square peg. But I think that's the opportunity, right? And why, you know, the framework that Burkhead and Brennan and the team did is incredible. And this was a time when the research in VR, again, I mentioned there's like three plus decades of research in XR in healthcare. What we saw when we were looking at this early on was that a lot of it is cul-de-sac, right? So the mental health specialists will do the research, right? Then the orthopedists will do the research, then the internists. And they do the same things, but they may describe them in different ways. So there wasn't any standardization. So really what we now are trying to do, and we have this opportunity with all of us in this room, is like create a community and create some standards. And Journal of Medical Extended Reality is one way we now have a source of truth. So when we have an updated version of like the VR framework, it can be a guideline in JMed XR, and it can be referenced. One of our highest cited articles, it's been around for about a little over a year, is literally a definitions article. Because like every study always starts with just defining the basics of XR, but they're not consistent. So now we have a single article that defines some of the base things in XR. That's really important. So I'm not sure if I actually answered the question, but I'm going to stop talking.
You answered some questions.
I answered something.
I bring up the provider, the clinician role, because that we always talk, you know, the awareness that of engaging the patient as the ultimate end user. Sometimes the end user is the clinician. So what their needs are, how does it fit into their workflow? Because it's learning to use another tool. They've already learned to use hundreds. How do you reduce that burden of learning the new technology?
Yeah, I just wanted to, just building on everything that's been said, and you know, I think we have a fairly experienced developer crowd in the room, but there are probably some early developers. And what I've seen is, you know, there are a lot of good developers that don't have medical backgrounds necessarily, but they have some ideas and they want to work in the sector. And I guess the recommendation I would make is it really important to consult and work with you know, professional physicians, nurses working in the space, and get their perspective on your idea and how that might impact the patient, how they might work with it. And it's a multi-party approach. On the clinical trial, I mean, working together, Julia, on the exercise one, and it was four different parties involved, 2 different schools. Meta actually contributed, loaned us the headsets, and then there was the end user developer, so a lot of planning, a lot of discussion went into it, going through the IRB process with both schools, and very complicated. But when multidisciplinary parties get involved, you can move pretty quickly.
And for those who are not researchers, IRB is the institutional review board that is there to oversee the study and make sure it follows human subjects protections. So you can't do anything without permission in any level of research. So the partnerships that are needed once you get through that point of I've built something, I think it can help. Then building those relationships with clinical researchers is what comes next. And as Brennan was describing, it's very sequential, right? There is a process to go through, and you can't really rush it. This is not a build fast and break things sort of approach. And what often happens in the development of solutions, and this happens in digital health as well, there is I'm just going to avoid it and go straight to consumer and just put it out on the market and see what happens, right? When taking that approach, if you're outside of the system, if you assess that it really doesn't need the delivery inside of a healthcare bubble, right? Assessing the harms, assessing the effects is that due diligence that would need to be done. So if you're collecting sensitive data, that in a sense becomes personal health information, right? How are we going to handle that?
And Julia, actually, just to go back a little with the clinician requirements, I mean, just referencing VR1, right? Clinicians are people as well. So I think the discovery is such an important piece, understanding the requirements, talking, as Bob said, and really having little assumptions, right? I have personally a very inherent bias to visual see-through, transparent see-through for proceduralists. And then talking with actual proceduralists, I've realized very quickly that they don't. They're good with video pass-through if it makes the procedure easier, if the ergonomics are better, if it's high quality enough, because they're already looking at screens. And I'm a clinician, I'm not a proceduralist, so I have a bias, but I was wrong. And you have to be able to talk and understand and talk to folks to really get a sense of what is actually needed, what people can tolerate, and what will work.
And so I mentioned you got to find the people to talk to. Where are you going to find them? How do you build those partnerships? And this is one of the things that IVRHA has done a fabulous job on in building that network. Bobby, can you explain how we can bring together?
Well, I think from the beginning, I wanted to create the organization so it wasn't just about the VR startups, but try to make it representative of the healthcare ecosystem. At least, again, I didn't come from a healthcare background before this, but it was pretty apparent quickly that in order to make something work in healthcare, all the people need to be involved. There's the patient side, there's the developer side, how's it going to get paid for, who's going to pay for it, how's it going to work within the hospital. So, there's so many different, the regulatory side. So there's just so many different moving pieces, and trying to build that collaboration early on, I think is important. And again, I think, I've seen developers just reach out to different clinicians in different hospitals or local clinics with an idea. It's about finding that one champion that has an interest. It's hard working from the ground up, but it does work sometimes. And then if you can get attention from senior leadership or others that see the value, it can have a big impact. And we are seeing that there are universities or our hospitals that are excelling really well with XR. It's on the small side, but it's growing and it's getting there.
And within IVRHA, you have lists of developers, lists of universities that are engaged in this to kind of filter through who is open to work together, right? Because starting from a Google search is going to take you a while. I think even using Gemini or something isn't going to get you to the right answer of finding which institutions and clinics are well suited. Cedars-Sinai, of course, is one of the leaders in this, but there's actually quite a few places across the country that are well suited to do this type of partnership through the piloting to clinical trial phases. So moving on to I think one of the things we need to show here is how this has worked. Right? What is XR doing now? If we can think of a good example of the benefits it's adding to your practice or your practice, what are the things that really stand out at the moment?
Well, I use VR almost every time I'm in clinic, and I'm a gastroenterologist. So I see a lot of individuals with abdominal pain and GI symptoms. And many of the patients that I see have chronic abdominal pain, and we can't clearly find an underlying explanation for it. We can run a blood test, we could do x-rays, we can do all sorts of different procedures, and we don't find the problem. And that's because the problem is much more fundamental. It has to do with how the mind and body, or the brain and the gut, as we call it, are communicating. And that requires a very different type of approach. And in my field, we'll talk a lot about cognitive behavioral therapy and psychological interventions, but it's hard to find trained psychologists or to pay for, if you don't have insurance, a psychologist and so on. So I'll use VR right in my clinic after I recognize the possibility of there being a brain-gut abnormality. And I have a technician who provides the headset, and I'll go and see another patient while the first patient is getting their VR therapy. And when I come back in 15 or 20 minutes, it's not uncommon for me to find somebody in tears, having all sorts of aha moments about their life, things that I never could do with a medicine. I can't inject somebody with a medication and make them cry tears of insight, except maybe a psychedelic, let's say. And that's what this is. It's a cyberdelic. And what it does through the power of presence is take control of the mind in a way that ideally is beneficent, in a way that is meeting people at the right moment in their illness experience to generate a new sense of self. And then the work really begins, which is to sit down and debrief and talk about what just happened in your mind and in your body. Why do you feel this way? And what does that say about what you can do in the future to help manage your condition without pills and injections and procedures and operations and all sorts of things like that? And it completely changes the conversation. And it does work. It doesn't work in everyone every time, but when it works, it's an aha moment that can change people's lives. And that's how I use it. I mean, I'm very much focused on patient-facing interventions rather than, let's say, surgical-facing simulations and training, which is a whole other discussion we should have. But for me, that's an incredible use of VR.
Any other stories?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm a palliative care physician clinically. So a lot of the care I take care of is pain. And, there's kind of two big buckets of pain, right? Acute pain, and usually when I get consulted, it's for cancer pain. And VR could be utilized as an adjuvant in that case. But the other big bucket is chronic pain, right? And chronic pain, as kind of Brennan kind of alluded to, which I think is probably the overlap between some of our patients, right? With, a lot of GI patients may have like a chronic pain source. A lot of times it has multiple kind of underlying causes of pain, whether it's like real physical kind of stimuli, but also there's usually a psychosocial dynamic. And that is where we've actually utilized kind of just commercial VR, no specific application, as a form of distraction. A lot of times these patients come in and they're in the hospital for a long time for, maybe they have a bone marrow transplant or they have some other kind of chronic illness where they're just in the hospital for a long time. And just having that escape is such a wonderful way to practically use the technology today. where I think is very exciting, as Brennan also alluded, is training. So, there's so much opportunity in the training side using VR. It's clearly, in my mind, the next generation of simulation. And instead of these large kind of facilities with mannequins, I think there's still going to be a need for that. Now you have the ability to create essentially the holodeck in 2025, right? And with the ability to network these headsets, you can now create pathways to enable training across wide distances as if you're together. That's really powerful. And I think that's an exciting place where I hope things go.
Yeah, if I can just add on, so on the application side, and maybe just to bring some good news about the space and the industry, because it's a weird year that's going on in terms of the industry. But and all this is in the last 2 months. Axios had a Future of Health Summit for the first time in DC a few weeks back, and pretty senior presenters, 6, 7 people, Katie Couric, a couple Congress people, some CEOs of Dannon and so forth. But of those 6, 2 mentions of VR usage, which at a non-VR or technology-related event was very, very surprising and great to hear. The CEO of Oscar Health had a really bad neck accident a couple years ago. He's been using VR and psilocybin for treating his pain. And the head of surgery for Children's National, they demoed a use of VR for ultrasound. And then also attended a Cancer X meeting a couple weeks ago. And what was interesting was, all the cohorts, all the startups there that were demoing what they were doing, not one VR AR app right now, but the head of the program in his opening statement, it was all about VR. It was about how they were using VR for distraction in a part of Atrium, how they're now launching this new immersive center with their expansion with Wake Forest. And so there's awareness happening. It is filtering through. It's in small pockets, and you just have to find it.
So we have, when we're out on the expo floor, one of the things what the filter I apply, like when I'm looking at new AR glasses, new sensors, and so on, and what I'm thinking about, what can I do here that can solve another way to address the problems that I care about. And in my development process, it's all related to brain health, neurobehavioral assessments. I've done a pain study as well. I feel like this is like the pain club. And it's really what other data streams, I'm sorry, I'm coming back to data because that's my deal, is coming through with that. How is the interaction going to change to become more intuitive, and the visualization to be better merged with the environment? And I think one of the things that will come next in the medical applications is the use of augmented reality for behavioral interventions. It's already in use with surgical planning and visualization, but we don't have a lot of examples yet of AR for a patient-facing solution. And so to push our imaginations of if we're combining our digital perception and our physical perception together, what are new things we could do there? If we're able to track where someone is looking in their physical space, and you're trying to figure out triggers for an eating disorder, what are the things about someone's environment that is contributing to their health problems? Right? I think this is one of those things we're going to see in the next decade. Because the integration of the hardware is becoming easier to use in our daily lives, right? Not completely yet, but I think it's getting there with all the progress I see out on that side. And it takes what we have in the clinic that may work in the clinical workflow for Brennan's GI clinic, and then taking it home and expanding where treatment occurs, things that may have only been able to occur in clinic can now be transported and at the same time monitored. The remote monitoring that is possible through currently with digital health, through phone-based mechanisms or web-based mechanisms, now having that within embodied technology. And so the richness of the data, in a lot of ways, once that becomes distilled into actionable data, is a way to enhance the provider's care and oversight, especially in chronic conditions. If we're looking at diabetes, recovery from an injury, that extended period, which for some can be a few weeks, for others, recovering from surgery or recovering from an injury can take months, and you need to figure out why. And observing them in the home in a safe way is another extension of that. But next 10 years, what do you see? What will be new? What new problems can we solve with emerging technologies? Yeah.
Well, I have a thought about this. I'm thinking about this room that we're in right now, which bears no resemblance to the world from which we evolved. 100 years ago, these were coastal plains, a couple buildings here and there, some chaparral. This is not where we belong. We're surrounded by drywall and fluorescent lights, getting no vitamin D. This is not the world that we evolved in. Now, I mention that because in terms of future opportunities, what's been happening over the course of the last 100 years is we've been increasingly surrounded by more and more technology. Our life has gotten more and more comfortable and more separated from the literal wilderness from which we evolved. And you wonder why people love virtual reality experiences of green spaces. And they love being in the wilderness or in a forest. This is called biophilia. E.O. Wilson described this term, which is our inherent love of the earth itself. It makes us feel better to be in nature. Now, what's happened is we've retreated from nature and cocooned ourselves in technologies. Many of you are spending much of this time looking at glass and pixels. That's a simulation of a reality that bears no resemblance to the reality from which our brains evolved. So there's a reality paradox, which is that we are living in a technological world, a simulation within a simulation, and now we are simulating consciousness itself in the form of AI. And at the same time, we need to retreat back to the biophilic nature of our origins. And so if I'm a developer, I'm trying to figure out how do I Trojan horse back in that love of life, that love of the world among people who are completely disconnected from it, yet need it like never before. I think that's the greatest opportunity, is this paradox of using the biophilia of XR to combat what is increasingly biophobia. How many kids now are excited to just go camping in the wilderness? Some are, because they were raised that way, but far fewer than our generation, and far fewer in our generation than our parents' generation. And the generation before that was living in the wilderness. Okay, and so was every generation for 10,000 years before that. So I think we need to actually go back to the basics and figure out how do we simulate tremendously biophilic, awe-inspiring worlds so that people actually feel a desire to go back into the wilderness, which is an even more realistic, more impactful form of reality than anything pixels can generate. So that's what I think is the biggest opportunity in this space for human health.
I'm gonna have a counterpoint. I think it's a really good position. Maybe for me in the next 10 years, what my hope is before I got into XR, I had about a decade in digital health, and one of the big problems we saw time and time again, especially working with any IT or anyone in security inside of a large hospital system, is the conundrum of using commercial grade solutions for enterprise grade problems. And that's like consistently a problem, right? And in many ways, that's where we are with XR in medicine, right? We have at our disposal some incredible commercial grade hardware and technologies and we're leveraging it, right, for these new and emerging opportunities in healthcare. And sometimes right now that's totally appropriate and will work, but in other ways, there will still be a gap to actually utilizing it at scale in a meaningful way. So my hope is that in the next 10 years, we bridge that gap. And it's gonna take everyone in this room and others to come up with some of these standards, to define what are the things where, just back to the kind of fundamentals, what are the things where XR have incredible evidence-based, true utility that need to be adopted at large for medicine and for healthcare and for humanity. And then use those as the levers to ultimately create the pathways to make enterprise-grade solutions for enterprise problems. That's my hope.
Yeah, and for sure, that's another characteristic of this, that these are tools that didn't come from medical device companies, but we're giving them a medical purpose. And so there's a translation that needs to occur, an adaptation of the tech companies as they are in part servicing the healthcare system. And that's something in process now. It's a little bit clunky, but hopefully that will get smoothed out, and that will adapt the enterprise modes and so on. That will do that. But this is something to consider in the process of where you are now, that we still are in an in-between space. There are plenty of resources, looking at the VR core as a model of how to do clinical trials and gather evidence. XRSI has resources on, one of the ones we have in development is on how to assess risk, a risk assessment framework for this field. And feel free to message me to get those resources, but that's a place to look. AMXRA will have resources and guidelines on how to approach this field, the compliance when it comes to the technical component. How do you get into a hospital system? To some degree, you need to ask that question to every hospital system you go to is going to be unique, but there are commonalities there. And one of the reference points you can use as you're developing, the VA has been working on a playbook, a guide on those IT requirements. And it's not just HIPAA. HIPAA covers very little amount of data. My simplified way of thinking about it is you guys can correct me, is if it ends up in your EMR, then it's usually covered by HIPAA. But if it's not something that goes in the EMR, you're in this gray space. Is that fair or no?
I just wanted to add one thing on the opportunity side, and then hopefully we can take some questions. I think the impact that AI is going to have over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years can't be underestimated. And I think developers and those that can start figuring out how to integrate AI into their backends, but also using it for content development, I think it's going to ease content generation for a lot of folks. It's going to be messy, but the companies that can figure out how to do that in a clean way, how to enhance it, and just start thinking about it and figuring out where it fits in their product, where it fits in for the hospitals, I think we'll have an edge, and it's impossible to predict the impact it's going to have right now, but it's going to have a lot of impact.
Yeah. Maybe it's a good time to open it up for questions. There are plenty of resources to lean on and experts in the room to ask questions to as you start upon that path. So are there any questions?
Thank you. Thanks very much. This is really interesting. So you mentioned pilot phases, and I'm wondering if you could talk about who pays for those pilot phases. I think that would be really helpful to me and maybe to other people here as well.
Yeah, well, we speak first, I guess, tend to pay for those on our own because we see it as an investment into a future research program. So, I run a research lab, so we have a certain amount of strategic funds to apply to early development. We just got, I hope we got an NIH grant. Depends if the NIH exists anymore, but we literally just got a perfect score on an NIH grant, which is a lifetime achievement. Using VR. Thank you. First percentile, using VR for inflammatory bowel disease. Okay. Well, we paid for the pilot work in order to enable us to write the grant, and now it will pay us back through that strategic decision. Philanthropy has been another source of funding for some of these early phase programs. There are a number of patients who are looking for these kinds of non-pharmacological approaches to augment their care and may have an interest in a particular disorder. So those are a few places. And of course, industry may have an interest in a rigorous, proper validation. And I think it's important to do it right first from the get-go. So you don't make a lot of mistakes, have to circle back, it becomes more expensive later. So those are just a few thoughts.
Yeah, I would just say AMXRA, one of the purposes of creating AMXRA is to support the community, advance the science, and educate. So we don't have it yet, but I think a clear mission and goal that I see AMXRA trying to help the community and ecosystem is being a source to help fund, hopefully, some of these early stage research opportunities. And we funded some labs affiliated with academic medical centers and others in our time so far. So I hope we can continue that.
Hi, this is Dev from Ruby Healthcare, and we are a startup in the mild cognitive impairment area, so dementia patients and other kind of thing. So we are looking at, initially going to different memory care units and other kind of thing, who are currently fixed on using the neurologist and other kind of things to do the aggression prevention and kind of, go with the regular level paper kind of puzzles and other kind of thing. That is what is there going on. And they do not understand this kind of things will help them. But they are saying that, okay, give us free for those things. For a company to give them free and other kind of thing is not possible. So I was just wondering, how do you get funding from those sources that you are saying? Because writing grant and getting funding is a very long process. For a startup, small startup, is a big job. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I think if I'm a neurologist or I run a memory care center, I want to, of course, see the value, the clinical value, incremental clinical value over paper puzzles or whatever you just described. And then secondarily, the business model around that. Am I going to be able to attract more patients or be able to charge more for my services? Or what will I benefit? How will I benefit by having this additional technology of incremental value available to my patients? And now it becomes a business modeling discussion. But I think in your case, the argument would need to be made through evidence and data that the software can enhance memory, let's say, and have a conceptual explanation for that. Memory and life in general is a spatial phenomenon. It's not a two-dimensional puzzle. It's a three-dimensional experience that we live in. And so it makes sense to engage all dimensions of thought with somebody with a cognitive impairment. That would be an argument you make, but that needs to be connected to a business model and to a clinical model. So I don't know, that's a very short, probably not very satisfying answer.
Yeah, the problem is they don't want the patient to be recovering. The main idea is to keep the patient wherever they are and continue it, not recover them cognitively and health.
Oh, well, that's
what they are kind of their
fortunate perverse incentive to running a memory care. You don't want their memory to improve, if I'm following that correctly. Yeah.
Hey guys, question from the panel. My name is Max. Ideal state is XR and placebo solves all the diseases and cures everything, right? That's ideal state. The reality is there's some nasty illnesses out there and, that still require medicine, drugs and pills and all that. What are your thoughts on combining XR and procedures, infusions, things like that? And have you thought about partnering with the big pharma companies and actually going as a partnership on it?
Can I start on that one? And I'll pass it over.
Go ahead.
So I feel like that was a premonition because on Monday, I'm running a symposium exactly on that topic at the largest biopharma international conference. And the audience there is to the biopharma executives to understand how this is a complementary and enhancing technology. So there, I think you can extend depending on maybe specific examples of how these two modalities can work together, but they're definitely not in competition. It's adding more options to the table.
Yeah, we're working with Ironwood Pharmaceuticals right now. Ironwood is one of the leading kind of small pharmaceutical companies in the GI space, and they make one of the leading FDA-cleared medications for irritable bowel syndrome. Now, I mentioned earlier that particular condition, IBS, is a disorder of gut-brain interaction, which means we need to think beyond the pill. A single pill is unlikely to cure that particular disease. So we're doing a randomized control trial right now of combining our IBS-designed VR program along with their FDA-cleared pill compared to the pill alone. So it's a research question. Is there an incremental gain of synergistically combining the VR, the digiceutical, and the pharmaceutical together compared to the pharmaceutical alone? And if there is an incremental benefit, there may be an FDA pathway so that a company could literally get that combination approved. And the headset comes with every prescription. So that would be the idea.
Can I just follow up on that? Thank you. So when I was speaking to pharma companies, one of their reservations was, well, then the FDA has approved the pill, and suddenly they have to do FDA approval for both together, and therefore that undermines their business model independently.
Well, it makes sense if they're running out of patent.
That's right. But to just build on that, the field of digital therapeutics has certainly had its ups and downs, but I think the overall trend is it is going to become more and more of a real and lasting kind of modality. And we have a saying in palliative, but I think it definitely translates just to medicine as a whole, is that there's a dose to your intervention, and there's a gradient, like it's like an upward gradient in the level of digital therapeutics. So certainly there are digital-only interventions, whether it's an app, a website, a chatbot, an XR modality, but then they're also paired with a pharmaceutical, and then in that there's a gradient, right? It could be an over-the-counter, or it could be already kind of a efficacious drug that we already use. So I think that's just going to continue to grow, and to me, like XR is just another modality in that field.
Let's take one more question.
Okay, for developers coming from other verticals like AEC or game development, are there any skills or experiences that may be unique to the healthcare ecosystem that could help in that transition?
So for the dev team, my first inclination is subject matter expertise on what you're targeting. If it might be a clinical psychologist, if it's really behavioral based thing, and that person needs to be involved in the design process so that it is aligning with the methodology of the intervention. Even if you're trying to invent a new way of treating something, not just replicating a validated or commonly used way of doing it, that person on the team will be able to have the foresight of how it fits in, where the potential harms may be with that new delivery system. So definitely having that along the way, and then someone who has more knowledge of the compliance requirements and in terms of how you develop it. Yeah.
Is there time for one more question?
Oh, we have one. Oh, great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Patrick. One of my customers has a solution for shoulder rehabilitation using VR. And I'm just curious, what are you seeing in terms of like the actual insurance companies' willingness, and what is XR on their radar in terms of paying for the care, having a physical therapist prescribe a course of virtual reality therapy?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, at least, the payment process is complicated, but we are seeing it so that we have a member who's in Australia who's built a pretty good business for physical rehab using VR. And just along those lines, he's a physical therapist. So But getting the CMS codes, a long, complicated process. You have to work with the societies as well. They have to recommend that. So it's a multi-year process, but you have to start somewhere. And if you start now, maybe you'll have it in 3-4 years.
There are codes.
But yeah, that was the other thing. There are codes for VR as durable medical equipment. There are codes you can apply to the software that is in there, whether it is assessing or treating a CBT. There's things to align to. It is a modular approach, right? There's not just one thing for the whole package usually, not yet.
Can I just answer the previous question briefly? I think this is a good way to close this, but there's a lot of developers in this room. That's awesome. And I think a really important thing is bridging the gap for communication, because there are a lot of great clinicians on the other end, and maybe they don't have any context for the development side. So being able to communicate clearly and bridge that gap is so important.